Hello, this is Anna Amelia from Northeast Animal Rights. We're carrying out another one of our Saturday Spotlight interviews, and we're delighted to have with us today Ronnie Lee. Ronnie is one of the co-founders of the Animal Liberation Front. He's a lifelong animal rights campaigner, and now he's currently doing vegan outreach and activism. So welcome, Ronnie, and thank you very much for agreeing to do this for us.
Well, hi, Anna. It's great to be here. Great pleasure to be on your show. And yeah, very pleased to be here.
You're very welcome. So without further ado, let's go to the questions. So you have a wide and varied background in animal rights, including sabbing, liberation, and vivisection. Can you tell the viewers and listeners how you started in animal rights, the problems it's caused you, and the frustrations you felt when you realised that you're pretty much the only vegan in some of the groups you were in?
Well, it all started when I was 19, and it was through my brother-in-law. At the time, my sister's first husband was vegetarian, and I was curious about this. Asked him why. He told me it was because we don't need to, kill animals for food, and he was very healthy. He'd been a vegetarian since quite a young lad. I was a big meat eater, but it made me think. And after kind of about 3 nights of trying to find excuses not to go veggie, I couldn't, and so I became vegetarian. About 2.5 years later, I picked up a copy of the Vegetarian Society's magazine in a health food shop, and there were articles. There was an article in there about veganism. I had no idea about what happened to the cows and the chickens, the calves and the chicks, and the terrible slaughter involved in the production of milk and eggs. And so I became vegan very quickly. And I also found out there are also articles there about animal experiments, about the fur trade and all these things. And I wasn't aware of any of that either. And so I immediately kind of resolved to try and do something about all these things. So I became an activist. I mean, very shortly after becoming vegan, there was an item on the television about hunt saboteurs. And so I joined the SABs, soon started my own group, and it kind of went from there. And then I was involved in kind of founding the Animal Liberation Front. Obviously, one of the hardships I went through was that I got arrested many times in connection with that, and served 3 prison sentences, a total of about 9 years I've spent in prison for animal liberation activities. In terms of being the only vegan in groups, I mean, in the early days, when I first became an activist in hunt saboteurs and in demonstrating against animal experiments, I think at first most of the other people weren't vegan. In fact, many weren't even vegetarian. But gradually that changed, because I think that people that got to know me, they actually went vegan. They weren't aware, the same as I wasn't aware at first, about what happens to the animals that are pressed for food. And a lot of the people that joined these groups became vegan. And so very quickly I wasn't the only vegan. I wasn't the only vegan. There were actually a lot.
Yeah. I think it's, we talk about single issues and sort of like the terms of effectiveness to raise awareness on veganism. I think there's 2 kind of camps. Sort of we have people who, who will go to, like the sabbing. I know it's hunt monitoring these days, because officially fox hunting is illegal, but we know that it still goes on.
Yeah.
But the days are numbered. We know that the days are numbered. But also vivisection as well, when we've seen that with the MBR beagles, that people aren't necessarily vegan who are protesting, but it does kind of open their eyes to other things as well. So how do you see these single issues in terms of their effectiveness to promote veganism?
I think they can be very useful in promoting veganism if that's kind of used in the right way. I mean, for instance, for many years, I did street stalls for whale and dolphin protection. Yeah. And obviously I was very concerned about the whales and dolphins, but one of the main reasons I did it was because I knew that would attract a lot of people to the store. And then I was able to give them information about veganism. you see, because these were already people that cared about animals, or some animals, you see. So it kind of filtered those people out, and then I was able to give them the information. So single issues can be used in that way to attract people to veganism. I've known people, for instance, do stalls in connection with Camp Beagle and the Free the MBR Beagles campaign, and they've actually had, as well as the anti-vivisection materials, they've actually had vegan leaflets and vegan booklets on the stalls and given those to people. So single issues can be used as a kind of gateway to veganism, and I think people involved in single issues should try to do that, because otherwise it's a wasted opportunity, isn't it? In other words, you've got these people, you're attracting these people who care about some animals, so there's something in those people that can be kind of worked on. And it would be a shame really to waste the opportunity to educate those people about veganism. So I always encourage people involved in single issues to actually do that. And it can be a very, very useful way of spreading the vegan message. I mean, obviously single issues do have a value of their own. I mean, we all want to see an end to animal experiments, we want to see an end to hunting and all these things. But I think we have to ask the question, why did those things exist in the first place? Why do we have animal experiments? Why do we have hunting? Why do we have the fur trade and all these things that are kind of considered single issues when people campaign only on them? The reason we have them is because of speciesism, because of human supremacism. And so we have to challenge that. We have to challenge what happens to animals at a deeper level, rather than just tackle, well, what are kind of, in a way, symptoms of that. And in order to do that, we need to educate people to become vegan. And it's very, very important that people doing single issues understand that and incorporate that into their campaigns.
Yeah. I think what you said is really, really important, because when we do things like World Day for Animals and Labs, we always have quite a lot of stuff about vivisection, but we do have the vegan stuff as well. You know, the healthy eating, the planet part of it, the animal part of it, everything. You know, because we're hoping that somebody will be attracted by something. I mean, most people, when we do the actions in Newcastle, will say, you know, there's 35,000 animals killed every single year in this university, and people are absolutely outraged by it. You know, by the sheer number of, because they can't sort of like comprehend the numbers of animals being tortured. But then we say, do you know how many animals are killed in the farming industry every single day? Do you know how many animals, you know, do you know how many foxes are killed, you know, accidentally? Do you know? So it is a good way of getting people in, but it's kind of, like you said, trying to get rid of the speciesism part of it.
Yes.
And for those who are watching this, I mean, I'm presuming a lot of people will know what speciesism is, but there may be people who don't. So do you want to explain what I can't even say it, speciesism is?
well, it's the oppression and prejudice against other animals because of their species. It's similar to racism. Oppression people because of their colour or their ethnic background. Yeah. And it's the same, because the only real difference between animals and other animals and humans is their body shape and their colour, and the fact that they have fur or they have scales or whatever. These are feeling sentient beings, and it's completely, as well as being unethical and immoral, it's completely irrational to consider that humans are somehow more important than other sentient animals. It's because we're not.
Yeah. So in terms of all the types of activism you've done, I mean, you've kind of like done a vast array of types of activism. So which do you have a particular preference, or do you think you have one which is more effective than others?
I think a lot of them have been effective. I mean, the Animal Liberation Front was very, very effective in reducing the number of animal experiments, and in also decimating the fur trade. Those were the two main successes of the ALF certainly in the UK. And then for about 13 years, after I was released from prison in 1992, not long after that, I met my wife, and we got involved in a campaign against the greyhound racing industry. There was no campaign against greyhound racing in this country, so we started one, and that was very successful. We were involved in closing more than 20 dog tracks, and we stopped a lot of proposed ones we were involved in stopping a lot of proposed ones from being open. So that was very successful in that way. But really, my what's most important to me, it really is the vegan outreach, because I think that's really fundamental. As I said, we have to challenge speciesism, we have to challenge human supremacism. Unless we get a large number of people that are opposed to that, and who actually believe in animal liberation, we're not going to actually achieve animal liberation. It's impossible unless we don't have to get everyone, but we do need certainly a large minority. If we don't get that, we're not going to get very far.
Yeah. So you'll be getting, we call this vegan bingo, but kind of, when people come up and say, I'm an animal lover, but, all this sort of stuff. Or so somebody's walking a dog in front of your stall, and you say, oh, you must love animals. Oh yes, I love my dogs, but they go home and eat, It's a massive disconnection, but obviously it's our job, your job and my job to try and get people to make the connection. So,
yes, absolutely.
So looking back over the years, you've been involved in activism. Was there any particular campaigns you're involved with which you're especially proud of? I mean, you mentioned the Greyhound Stadium, which is absolutely tremendous. The amount of animals you've saved in that. Is there anything you would have done differently because they didn't work in the way you had expected?
I think in terms of the ALF, there's things I would have done differently, because obviously there were mistakes I made that led to me being arrested.
Get arrested.
So well, I wouldn't repeat those, but it's easy to kind of be wise with hindsight, isn't it, on these things? I think, to be honest, kind of what's happened if we look at the history of the movement. If we kind of call it the animal protection movement, so that we can go back further in history, because the idea of animal rights only really arose in the 1970s. Animal rights, animal liberation, it was in the 1970s where that started. Before that, it was more animal welfare, animal protection type stuff, and it was all kind of single issues really. And then veganism, veganism really kind of started to increase in the 1970s as well at the same time. But what happened, although there were a lot more vegans, and a lot of vegans were activists in those, a far greater percentage of vegans were activists in those days, although there were fewer vegans obviously then. Despite that, nobody really campaigned for veganism. It was all still the single issues. And now it was vegans involved in campaigning for those, and vegans kind of were involved in running a lot of the main organisations, to be honest, but none of them campaigned for veganism. And campaigning for veganism is only, in the history of the whole movement, it's quite recent. It's only started about 25 years ago with vegan fairs, people started to do street outreach. And as a result of that, we're where we are now. We've still got a hell of a long way to go, but obviously there is this big increase in veganism. It's so much easier to live vegan. You can get vegan options everywhere. Supermarkets full of stuff. I mean, we've always had vegan food because what we've got more of now is vegan. Kind of
like ready meals.
Ready meals and stuff.
Options
but we've always had vegan food. I mean, vegan food is nuts and bolts. We've had that forever, haven't we? So it's not true that vegan food's is a new thing whatsoever. It's just that the type of food that's produced now probably makes it easier for somebody to transition who's been traditional diet transition, and then hopefully they'll transition again and start eating more healthy food based ingredients, which would be good. But I think had that vegan campaigning started earlier, we would be so much further along now. I mean, if in the 1970s, when the animal rights movement arose, if the vegans then had done vegan campaigning instead of being involved in all these single issues, or perhaps as well as that, I think we'd have been so much further along the road now. And kind of that's one thing I regret, that I didn't see that and I didn't realise that back in those days.
Yeah. But I suppose it's all hindsight, isn't it? I mean, you're so focused on putting your time into these really, really big campaigns. And I think veganism then was probably much more marginalised and misunderstood, whereas a lot of people would understand fox hunting, a lot of people would understand vivisection much more clearly than I've got to make a personal change to what I'm eating, or how I see things. But I think there's been massive progress. I mean, over the years, since the 70s, 80s. I mean, every decade you can see big progress being made.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about the page you've got encouraging vegan education, Eve, which I follow, and I post on as well, and how important you think it is to educate people about what we see as blatantly obvious, and how do we reach children as well? Because I do the Animal Aid School Speaker Programme, and and also my background is education as well, because I worked in a secondary school for 20 odd years, but I see that it's really, really important. They are our next sort of set of vegans and next generation. So how do you sort of why did you set it up, and how important do you think it is?
Well, I set up the page and the group encouraging vegan education quite some years ago when I first got involved in vegan outreach and realised the importance of that. Yeah. But kind of sort of since then, there's been lots of other similar groups and pages on Facebook. So, Eve isn't something I concentrate so much on now, because that whole idea has become so much more widespread. I mean, I'm very much focused on stuff locally in my local vegan group here is in North Worcestershire, Wild Forest Vegans, and I'm kind of, as well as the importance of spreading the message locally, I kind of want to use that as an example for what other people could do. It's a very community type based group, and in an area that's not a big city area. I mean, most vegan outreach seems to take place in the central big cities, whereas I think it should happen everywhere. And how you do it in a kind of smaller area may be a bit different than how it operates in the centre of a big city. And so that's what I'm doing locally in terms of the importance of doing things, in my local area, but also to kind of, encourage other people to do the same. And that's very important to me. And I think, in terms of children, I think the school talks are absolutely brilliant, and I'd love to see lots more people doing it. I think it'd be great if in every town there was at least one person, or preferably a number of people who did the school talks, and so we can get the message through to children and youngsters of various ages. One thing we've been doing locally as well, I mean, it hasn't happened since the COVID, but before then, we have a lot of schools that are interested in environmental issues. The children are, encouraged to think about the environment and take action to protect the environment, and they have these little open days that are focused on that. And our vegan groups have stalls there, because we're sort of part of a local Green Alliance. And so that opens doors to us to have stalls at those events. And they've been absolutely brilliant, because it's after school. There's things where children have grown their own, vegetables, and, there's the people from the Wildlife Trust there, and various environmental groups, and we have a stall there for the vegan group. It's obviously focused on the environmental aspects, but obviously you can always bring in what I'd consider to be animal liberation aspect as well. Once you're there, and they've been brilliant, because it's the children, the parents, even the grandparents, been loads of interest, and we try to have vegan food samples on those as well, and those are great. So that's another way. School talks are very important, but there are other activities, within schools that local vegan groups can get involved in, where they can spread the message.
I think, you mentioned the climate aspect, and also I've been asked to do a talk through the Animal Aid Programme in a local school about, they're doing like a big climate change event, and someone who works at the school knows that obviously I'm an animal rights activist, so she's asked me to come along and kind of do almost like secret veganism, kind of like by stealth, kind of they're doing climate change. So can I do a little bit on, these are very young children as well, can I do a little bit on animal agriculture and fishing and how that impacts on the environment? We did, with the COP26, we took part in a big march in Newcastle, and it was really, really well organised. It was absolutely brilliant. Really loved it. Apart from, we were literally the only animal rights group there, and we were like, you're kind of massively missing a trick. So I was at a meeting last night, and they're all lovely people, they're all great, but it's all about fossil fuels. It's all about, more about the parts of the components of mobile phones and everything, you know, and you kind of think this is a very, very simple way of affecting climate change. Can people just not get it? And I find it very frustrating, but you've kind of got to go along with it, because at some point somebody will start listening, you know. Anyway, I'm kind of like, so I'm digressing myself now.
I think it's, yes, I think it's important. I think it's important for local vegan groups to kind of get involved with, you know, the local environmental groups. I mean, we've got this Green Alliance locally, as I mentioned, and that's great, because that means that we've got a voice at their events to kind of promote the importance of at least adopting a vegan diet to combat the climate crisis. Because you see, there's been a paper produced by a group called Climate Healers, and a lot of the talk about greenhouse gases and you know, the climate crisis is to do with carbon being pumped into the atmosphere, obviously through the burning of fossil fuels in various ways. And also the greenhouse gases that come from animal agriculture, the methane, etc. That's estimated has been about, you know, estimates as high as maybe a quarter of that comes from animal agriculture. But what very often isn't taken into account, almost always isn't taken into account, is what's called opportunity costs of animal agriculture. In other words, if we all ate a plant diet, a vegan diet, there'd be loads of land that wouldn't be needed to grow food, because, you know, a massive amount of food is grown to feed farmed animals, isn't it? And then as well as the oceans being an important resource for combating the climate crisis, and also for biodiversity, and they're being devastated by industrialized fishing. Another reason to adopt the vegan diet. All these things, the opportunity costs, the amount of carbon that could be taken out of the atmosphere if all this land that was freed up could be rewilded, go back to forest. Climate healers have calculated that when that's taken into account, the actual contribution of animal agriculture to the climate crisis, or to, you know, to greenhouse gases, is 87%.
It is absolutely massive.
And so that's really why it's so important. There was an article in the well, it was in several newspapers. I certainly know it was in the Guardian, Independent, relating to research done at the University of Oxford in 2018, where they came to the conclusion that adopting a vegan diet was the single most important thing anyone can do in their own life to protect the planet. It's really important, because it's important. Yes, we need government action in lots of ways. We need government action to curb, you know, the burning of fossil fuels, obviously. We also need government action to move our society towards a plant diet, towards vegan diets, and you know, help farmers to transition, encourage people to change. That's really important, but there's a hell of a lot we can do as individuals, and it's hypocritical not to act. It's hypocritical to be shouting to the government to do things when we're not doing things individually. It's rather like saying, I want the government to do something about institutionalized racism, but it's all right for me to carry on being a racist myself. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The two things go hand in hand, and it's kind of really the same in a sense with kind of veganism. That I think veganism and activism kind of go hand in hand. They did for me. I kind of, you know, when I became vegan, and that was about not doing things. I'm not gonna buy these animal products. I'm not gonna go to the circus. I'm not gonna go to the zoo. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna support Cancer Research UK or the British Heart Foundation. I'm going to avoid all these things. But avoidance isn't enough. Avoidance isn't enough, because what about all the other people that are still carrying on oppressing animals or buying into that? Unless we change them, we're never going to achieve animal liberation. Not enough for us, just ourselves, to change. I mean, that is the first thing to do. But very quickly we move on to trying to change other people and trying to change the system. You know, otherwise we're not going to get very far. And for me, I immediately saw that, you know, as soon as I became vegan and started boycotting and avoiding all these things. I immediately wanted to kind of go out and be active. Well, I started with hunt saps, but then other things, and eventually vegan outreach, and that's that's really important. And all vegans can do it, because it's not a big thing. You don't have to end up in prison or anything like that, or even do shouty stuff. Just delivering leaflets. Our local group, we've delivered about 10,000 leaflets urging people to have a compassionate Christmas. Leaflets from Animal Aid and from Viva. And that's just through getting people to say, some people taking 100 and just delivered them in the local area. And what could be easier than that, pushing through leaflets through
Well, I agree. I think when you become vegan, you have a moral obligation to speak out. It's not a case of speak out whichever way you either feel comfortable with, or you or your time constraints. You can share social media posts, you can do petitions. I've said over and over again, there's many ways of being active. It doesn't have to. It doesn't automatically involve breaking into houses. That's great that people can do that, because obviously people need to get footage of what goes on. But if that's not something you could cope with, you can do very simple things over social media. And I'm constantly banging the drum about that, because if you're vegan, you have a moral obligation. It's not just about not eating animal products or not wearing wool or silk or leather, that sort of thing. It's about actually speaking out and challenging what has been the norm. And I feel as if normalizing veganism is probably the biggest thing we can do. Make it normal. Make people who are killing animals, exploiting animals, make them the abnormal, and we are the norm.
I think that's right. And I think the more people that are vegan, the easier it is for other people, because most people, I've never cared about being different from other people. That's never worried me whatsoever. But most people do. Most people are very concerned about, they don't want to stand out in the crowd. And so the more normal veganism becomes, people will more rapidly be attracted to it. It's like if you looked at it as a graph from when veganism began, so perhaps when the Vegan Society was formed, although people were vegan before that, although they didn't call themselves vegan. And it kind of is very low at first, a long time, and then it kind of shoots up like that. There's a kind of tipping point where it ceases to become so unusual, and then more people are attracted to it, and then it becomes easy to live as vegan, easy to get the stuff, eat out, and all these things. You're not thought of as being a complete weirdo from another planet or something. And so that's kind of how it's worked. And what I was saying earlier, had we started that earlier, it would have been very difficult in the early days. It would have been hard. But we would have kind of started, so we would have been much further on, because that point where it suddenly went up would have come earlier, and we'd be much further on now. So that's why that's kind of one of my regrets, that I didn't kind of see that. I didn't kind of be involved in starting that off much earlier. But nevertheless, we are where we are, and we've kind of just got to kind of go forward now. And I think one of the most important things really is, if you look at all the local, any kind of activism, and probably more, in terms of the main thing I'm interested in, like local vegan groups that are active, it's normally down to one or two people that kind of drive these groups. And other people join in, and so those people that do that are kind of really important. It's kind of like, I'd like to see a lot more people involved in that, but that tends not to be that kind of. There tends to be certain people that stimulate things, and we need kind of more of those people everywhere. We need more people to kind of step up to the plate to be those people. Because one of my kind of mantras is to say to people, look, if you're not vegan, become vegan. If you are vegan, become an activist. And if you're an activist, become an organizer, because unless somebody organizes, things don't happen. And so we need these people to stimulate action, to be constantly thinking about, in their local areas, thinking about, what can I do? What can I organize? How can we promote it? And the other thing is that you mentioned social media. Social media is kind of very important. I've realized the importance more of it, since COVID and the lockdown, we weren't able to get out and do things outside world. I think possibly one of the problems that vegans have in terms of social media, and it varies from person to person, of course, but I think a lot of vegans tend to be in a situation where almost all their friends and followers on social media are vegans. So they're putting stuff on there that people already know about. Yeah. And I think it can give people a false sense of doing something. Oh, I put a post on social media, I don't have to do anything else now. You know, without analysing, well, how effective really was that, and how many non-vegans did that reach? And so I think that's the kind of, I think perhaps with new vegans have still got a lot of their kind of non-vegan friends putting stuff on social media. I'd say don't do anything too graphic, because people just turn off. Stop following. You've got to pitch it about right. But one thing we did locally when all the lockdown started, we started advertising on social media, because if you advertise, you break out of the vegan bubble, and you can set the adverts to kind of just to fall in your local area. If you see what I mean. So you're kind of spending money, you know, sending something to someone on the other side of the world that might not be so relevant to them. And so it was a bit of a learning curve and a bit tricky to set up, but we've done that, and we've done dozens of ads now on Facebook and Instagram, and video ads normally, because they're short videos. We've had loads of people. What's caused loads of people to visit vegan websites. It's been very, very successful. So it's something we're, you know, even when we're kind of fully able to get out and about again, we're still going to carry on with that, because it was so, you know, it was so successful really in terms of value for money. So that's something we've learned. Just something good that's come out of all this has been that, really. And I think that's something that other groups could look into. You need to have a Facebook page to do it. It's something other groups could look into. If anyone's interested in that and wants to contact me, I'll be happy to give them.
That's brilliant.
Give some advice about it. You know, because it is another way we can do stuff.
We've done. I mean, you're right with the social media, because what you do is when I do these interviews and I push them out, I do sponsored ones. So I get them advertised, so they do go to a wider audience. Otherwise, they're just literally going on our page, and only people who follow our page see them, and that's kind of pretty pointless. Because people who are vegan will enjoy watching them and listening to them, but I've learned so much by talking to people like you. I mean, I've been doing animal rights for pretty much most of my life in one shape or form, but I have learned so much from talking to different people, and also the different issues people talking about, the different backgrounds they're coming from, the different countries, you know. So it's a really, really good way of, the adverts are a really good way of reaching an audience who you might not have thought would have been interested in the first place.
Yeah, and it costs money, and you know, people might not like giving money to Mark Zuckerberg to Facebook, but then again, you got to weigh up the pros and cons. All right, so I mean, when you have leaflets printed, you know, that's kind of, people say, oh, you destroy trees, but you know, the good that can do far outweighs any harm that's done by it. And I think it's the same with advertising on social media. You give a little bit of money to the bad guys, but I know it's kind of it's one of those things. I mean, I hate social media because of what it represents, and the amount of problems it causes people. You know, particularly coming from working in a school, it would cause many problems. But then you think, well, you have to get your message out some way. So it's kind of like working with the devil, you know, sort of thing, you know. So anyway, so what's next for you then? Because you seem as if you're always busy. You've always got things going on. So what's next for you? I think kind of more of the same. You know, it's kind of carrying on, trying to get. I think it's so important that we have active vegan outreach groups everywhere, in every town, city, in every suburb of every city. People focused on their local area, spreading the vegan message in all sorts of ways. I mean, there's loads of different ways of doing it, and they're all important. And different members of the public are attracted by different methods, aren't they? You know? And that's what I want to kind of work on, is obviously, you know, doing a lot more stuff with my own group, but also trying to get other people elsewhere to do the same thing, to set up groups, to become active, to encourage others, so that we've got this huge network of local of vegan outreach groups spreading the message everywhere. And I think if we can get enough people, because it's not just to do with lifestyle. I mean, that's really important. You know, like loads of people adopting a vegan diet can make a huge difference in terms of the number of animals that are spared. But it's also to do with politics, because it's really important that we have proper action from government. I mean, this like appalling government we've got at the moment, they were only voted in by 30% of people that are eligible to vote. That's all you need, 30%. And so when you educate people to become vegan, you can change the people politically as well. You can make them want to vote for politicians who are going to care about animals. And also some of those people may well become politicians themselves. We need a lot of more vegan politicians, a lot more vegans on local authorities, a lot more vegans in Parliament, so that we can actually change things and get proper laws to protect animals and proper laws to promote veganism. And so educating people affects their lifestyle and the change that can come through that, but it also affects the political landscape, and so that's another really important reason to go out there and educate.
Yeah. Well, that's all my questions for now. I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. If you wouldn't mind sticking around for a couple of minutes afterwards, so I'll catch up with you. But it's been absolutely, honestly, I never cease to be amazed about how many sort of like different things I can learn from talking to people like you. And I know that people in my group have been asking me to get hold of you for absolutely ages. So I'm really grateful that you've agreed to do this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who like to get hold of me, not always for a good reason.
No, you know what I mean. These are all peaceful animal rights activists.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But thank you very much. Anyway, I'm going to sign off for now. So this is Anna Malia from North East Animal Rights talking to Ronnie Lee and saying thank you very much and goodbye for now. Okay.
Thanks, Anna. Bye then. Bye.